These attacks, these fatalities all seem to be becoming more common. So should police be armed with tasers? Should they be armed with firearms? To talk about that now, Chief Constable Nick Adderley, he's made the decision to be the first to arm his whole force, and that is in Northamptonshire, with tasers. Alongside him, former police firearms officer Tony Long, who says tasers aren't enough and we should go much further. And you know what you're talking about, Tony, because you are a former marksman. You have had to discharge a gun in anger. What are the consequences? It's all very well us saying, and the feeling in the force saying, we should be armed or we should have protection. But we have done this interview a couple of years ago, and I can tell you, most of the calls we got were from serving officers who said, we don't want this, we don't want this.
So can I quantify what I say when I say that I think police officers should be armed, fully armed? That's with a huge proviso. I'm taking that from a moral standpoint, and you touched upon it a moment ago, that I don't think we should be asking a body of people to protect us as citizens without giving them the correct equipment to do the job. You know, Nick's introduced, or he wants to introduce tasers across the whole of his force, and that's a huge step in the right direction. My only concern is that the taser is intended as a tool for apprehension. It's not intended in real terms as a self-defence weapon. You know, if somebody's running at an armed police officer, say a UK armed response vehicle officer will be armed with a pistol and he'll be armed with a taser. If he's got someone running at him with a machete, he isn't going to go to his taser, he's going to go to his pistol. So the taser is really intended for bringing someone safely into custody who's dangerous, but not an immediate threat to life.
Well, Nick, what's the mood, Nick, within the force? As we were saying there before, a lot of the view was a couple of years ago, look, we would like to stay the way it is. We don't want to become armed forces.
Well, in terms of taser, the mood is very much that we want taser. The majority of officers now, certainly in Northamptonshire, and the response since I made the announcement yesterday from across the country is that officers want to be equipped with taser.
I mean, in your own force, it was 94% or something.
94% of officers want it.
Yes, please, we'll have them.
And I think the 6% that don't, I think that's welcomed as well, because it's the bit about this is not a decision to take lightly, because when you use taser and when you issue taser, that has to be a well-thought-through process. But I'm afraid as a chief constable and as an employer, I cannot sit by now and see the level of injury that's happening every day to both my officers and across the country.
Was there one final straw, Nick, that you just went, this is enough now, I have to look after my officers and they all need tasers?
Well, again, it's not a decision that I came to overnight. This is something I've been thinking about for many years, actually. I've been involved in firearms for over 20 years, and this is a culmination of things. But actually, when you start to see the level of violence and risk that our officers are taking every day, we respond to different crime types and we adapt to deal with different crime types. We are not adapting to deal with the threat and risk to police officers. Now's the time to do it, and I'm going to do it, and I hope that others follow. Is
knife crime something that's way up there in your decision process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have lost count of the amount of times I've gone to knock on people's doors, police officers' doors, police staff doors, to tell their next of kin that their loved one is in hospital, has been injured or has been killed, and I've had to do that. I don't want to do that anymore, Ruth, and I'm at the point where I want to give them the best protection.
It's one thing saying arm officers, either with a taser or a firearm, but, Tony, the consequences, once you pull the trigger, I just keep reading reports that officers are immediately stood down from duty after that.
I think we'll all be in agreement. You know, if a police officer uses force, then that absolutely should be scrutinised. You know, I don't think there's a single police officer, whether they're an armed police officer, whether they're trained on taser, or whether they're just an officer that's armed with a spray of irritant and a baton. We all know, and we all agree that, you know, we have to justify a use of force. No police officer goes on duty wanting to use any force. But the reality is, if you're dealing with people who don't want to be arrested, who have committed crimes, and they're either trying to escape or they're trying to fight with you, then, you know, it is part of a police... You know, we used to be called a police force. You know, it's a play on words, but we're now called a police service. But the reality is, I've never serviced a violent drunk into the back of a van.
In your time serving as a Metropolitan Police marksman, how many times did you have to discharge your firearm?
I was involved in 3 situations where I had to open fire. 2 of them in the 1980s. One was a small child had been held hostage by a man armed with a knife. who had stabbed and killed the child's mother in front of her. The second one was an armed robbery, where there were 3 armed criminals wearing balaclavas and armed. And the final one was exactly 100 days before I was due to retire in 2005. And that finally got dealt with in July of 2015.
Took a long time.
When I was acquitted of murder.
Yeah.
So how does that make you feel? I mean, you're there to defend the general public. You're there to defend fellow officers yourself. Is it worth pulling the trigger? I mean, the consequences.
Well, the reality is, and Nick made this point earlier to me when we were having a discussion about it, is that no police officer, with the knowledge of how much scrutiny they're going to be under and how long the process is going to take, is ever going to go out on duty and think to himself, I'm going to shoot someone today.
Yeah.
You make that decision to pull that trigger. You might have been on the operation for 4 days.
Yeah.
It might have been shaping up for about 10 minutes. You might have had line of sight of the suspect for 30 seconds, but it's that final half a second before you fire, which is the decision, the moment you make the decision to fire.
It's a huge decision to make. Nick, I know there will be people saying, yes, I understand all that, but is it the start of a slippery slope? You know, if we arm our police, are the criminals then going to be armed back?
Yeah, and I don't accept that argument. I mean, we still want to police by consent. That is a constitution we hold dear, and we will maintain that. This is about maintaining the levels of trust and confidence within our communities. And it is worth making the point that 95, 99% of the public, law-abiding, decent people who support their police. It is that small minority who, what we have seen over recent years, have a propensity and are going out armed with equipment to try and neutralise the police if they get caught.
And in that minority, in your opinion, why do you believe they have such a lack of respect for the police force?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons. Some of the social issues that we're facing now, I think some of the cuts that have happened to public services across, whether that's early intervention programmes, drug and alcohol rehabilitation, we are seeing a cohort now of people that actually are suffering from mental health illnesses as well. We're seeing a huge increase in that. All of this is now building up as a bit of a boiling pot. And, of course, committing crime is no excuse for any of those things, but we have to be prepared to deal with what we come across.
Well, you see,
every day.
you know, you get people like Ruth will say here, oh, it's not the British way, or I get a bit intimidated when I see police officers with guns and that
I think
sort
we're
of
not
thing.
used to it, are we? So when
No,
we go
but
abroad,
I just wanted,
you
my
see
point
them...
is this. You say it's not, people say it's not the British way, and we're saying they do it in Germany, they do it in Spain, they do it in France, they do it in Italy, they do it in lots of things. They do it in the UK. I have grown up in the UK routinely, for as long as I can remember. The Police Service of Northern Ireland and the Royal Ulster Constabulary before that are routinely armed. They're armed, they carry guns, all of their officers carry guns. Now, we don't then live in a way that we think this is the Wild West or anything. It's just becomes the norm.
I think the term policing by consent has been abused over the years, and some people have sort of lead you to believe that you can only police by consent if your officers are unarmed. I mean, the reality is that there's a section of society that will never consent to policing. They're called criminals.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the public have no problems with it.
Well, it's funny how the mood is changing on this. You know, as I say, 2 years ago, we wouldn't have had this result in the poll, but now, should all frontline police officers on our app, we're asking this poll, and there are your results on the air at the moment. 95% of you who have taken part so far on this, and you can log on to the app and have your say, are saying, yes, you believe your police officers should carry tasers, OK? Tasers. And the fascinating thing about tasers as well is that it's the use has sort of doubled. But as soon as you, what's the term? As soon as you
draw the weapon.
Draw the weapon, that's the thing. It's brilliant because you put a red dot on the baddie and they think twice. So it doesn't actually have to be fired. They just see the red dot and they know what's coming and they go, OK, I give up.
Well, the interesting thing about that, and this may sound counterintuitive, but by issuing officers with more tasers, we will probably see the amount of assaults drop. Again, last year in my force, we drew the taser 100% of the time. If you like, 80% of that time, it was just red dotted, and that diffused the situation. What that means is the subject was not injured, and it also means the police officer wasn't injured. I'm currently dealing with an officer who's had his ear bitten off. I have an officer who's had his fingers bitten off, an officer that's been slashed, thrown down the stairs. Over 50,000
just
days
seeing
lost.
an officer with a taser is enough to diffuse the situation quite often.
And that's what I want.
OK, well, thank you both
he
very
is
much.
Northamptonshire Police Chief Constable. He is Nick Adderley, and beside him a former Met Police marksman, Tony Long, and they're both advocates of arming the police, certainly with at least tasers. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much indeed.